Welcome, everyone, to DEI After 5, the show that focuses on topics across diversity, equity, and inclusion with some of the brightest minds in the industry. Here's your hostess, inclusive culture curator and coach, Sacha Thompson.
Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of DEI After 5. So today, we are going to do a little bit of unpacking. One of the things that we often hear, or we're starting to hear more of, I should say, is, this focus on culture, this focus on creating inclusive cultures, this focus on shifting more from kind of this DEI and in the very in the box thinking around that to how do we create inclusive cultures and what does that look like? And so today I'm going to unpack this conversation with my guest, Adriana Vaccaro, who is a consultant in this space, who is very passionate about culture in the same ways that I am. And so I really am excited about having this discussion with her. So welcome, Adriana. How are you?
I am well. So happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So for anyone that may not know who you are, can you tell us a little bit about you and how you got into this work?
Absolutely. I worked for large corporations for about 11 years, and diversity and inclusion culture, those were important topics, but they were never urgent. So when I started my organization, my company, Culture Redesign, I wanted to become that resource for other companies that wanted to make culture a priority, not in the sense of having a poster or having, a nice paragraph and a set of values, which, they're all very important, but in a more practical way. What does it feel like to work in an inclusive culture? That's where I can come in.
I love that you said it that way. What does it feel like? Because, and folks that have listened to the show or heard me speak anywhere else will say, so many organizations have their values and mission and culture kind of written on the cafeteria wall, but the culture is what people experience every single day.
Right.
And it's what's tolerated every single day. That just determines the culture. So talk to me a little bit, how are you defining culture? Because I think also if we have a standard if we have an understanding of what the definition is that we're going to be utilizing today, that may help people as well too.
I use behavioral science in the workplace and I use Six Sigma. So I try to combine all these elements to create this new concept of culture where it's not a claim. So usually there is a claim. We are a company that believes in XYZ. That is the claim. That is not your culture. So there is claim, then there is infrastructure, and that is all the things that are in place so that you could create the feeling that you're claiming. And then there is reality. So in the work we do, we start with the claim, we take a look at reality, and we try to make them both the same size. Like if you picture a circle, we want all circles to be the exact same size. For this special program in terms of DEI, having a diverse team doesn't mean that you have diversity of thought, because you might have a group of people that are very different, but if they don't feel included, if they don't feel competent, if they don't feel appreciated, they will not communicate. They will really not express their ideas. So looking diverse and being inclusive are two completely different concepts.
As you were speaking, one of the things that I thought about is, I worked at a place where part of the culture was, if you had an idea, you had to write a document. But when you think about inclusion or exclusion and how people communicate, that may not be that most ideal for many people, right? And so they're trying to fit into this box of this organization by doing these things that are very unnatural to who they are or how they express themselves. And so there's a struggle. And, when there is that struggle or where there is that conflict, right, what you start to hear down the line is, oh, this person's not a culture fit.
Right.
And you and I both feelings about that phrase. So talk to me about, why culture fit is not the way to go.
Yes. Culture fit implies that you might or might not be the right person for the job, right? You might or might not be the right person for that particular culture. And that contradicts the whole meaning of authenticity, which is telling people, bring your whole self to work, be who you are. We are accepting of differences. You tell them in the same sentence, but you're not a fit, right? So we always think about, in terms of culture, we want to optimize the environment. We want to make sure there is ecological safety, there is accountability, but we also want to make sure there is space for a culture add, so that I can show up and be who I am, not try to be someone else, not filtering my talents, just be the way I am, while staying in alignment with the organizational mission, vision, and culture.
And I love that. And, when I talk about culture add, one of the things that causes some pause for people is, you want someone that's going to challenge the status quo a bit, right? Because that's where innovation happens. That's where you start to think about creativity. That's where you start to really get big ideas. And so if you have someone that's a culture fit, they're not going to necessarily push against the status quo because they're fitting into the box that was created, right? And so that creativity is going to be limited to, what is there, versus a culture add. It's like, okay, how can I make this better? How can I push or challenge this organization in a way that does not go against our values? Because to your point earlier, that's something that's different. So I'm still aligned with our values, but I'm pushing our culture to think about things in a very new and different way, and allowing me to show up in a way that most benefits me and the organization, right? And so as we're listening to, or as we're both working with organizations that are focused on culture, and you're creating these inclusive cultures, what happens when an organization is global, right? When you have national cultures that may or may not align with the headquarters, right? Headquartered culture. What are some of the things that organizations need to be cognizant of if they are going into places or spaces that may not, the country themselves may not align totally with where the company is? I know that was very clunky, but yeah.
I will.
Yeah.
Right. So if we are looking at a global organization, I try to bring back the concept of equity. Something simple as time zone, right? We cannot have all meetings on my time because for someone else that is midnight. So creating policies that are in alignment with the core values, while still considering how other individuals are experiencing the workplace. And in a global culture, the workplace might not necessarily be an office. The workplace is your connection to the work you are doing, right? So creating that ability so that you can connect to what you're doing and I can connect to what I'm doing from our own individual perspectives while staying in alignment. And in terms of core values, I think when we really translate core values into behaviors,
yes,
there is enough room there to put our own infusion of personality while staying in alignment. Like sometimes I think values get to be too romantic, like honesty, integrity, which they're great words, but what does it mean for
what
me?
does it look like? Yeah, right. What does it look like day to day? Exactly.
Right. So I always try to break it down. Look, tell me things you're gonna do every day to live up to that integrity. What does it mean? Like we tell the truth, we show up on time, whatever it is for different people. And considering different cultures, it might look a little bit different in different places. However, we should be in alignment with the bigger picture.
Yeah. As you were talking, something came to my mind around, there's some countries, and we'll put it generally like that are not LGBTQ plus friendly, right? And so if you have people that are in your organization that are part of the LGBTQ plus community, right? What you're saying is, how do you make sure that they can do their work and feel included as a part of the organization? And that's almost a safe space. And I hate using that phrase, where what's happening in the country does not necessarily impact how they're operating in their workplace, and vice versa, right? There may be organizations that are not friendly to the LGBTQ plus community, but the country that they're in, they have offices in a location that is. And so it's balancing those things. But what was going through my mind is, as an individual that's looking for an organization, that's part of what I need to be looking for as well too, right? Because it's not just how can I add to that, but the psychological safety you mentioned, right? The physical safety in some cases as well too. And what policies or procedures does the organization have to ensure that I can do my job in the best way possible? And if those things aren't in place, then that's something I need to consider if this is, an organization or the type of work that I want to do. So it's just I'm kind of thinking, high level on when we talk about culture, it really does go beyond the walls of the organization. It really kind of is infused in everything and all of the decisions that we make, and how we are allowed to show up in these places and spaces.
Right. I love that you brought up like different countries. I was born and raised in Colombia, and when I do work with clients that have offices there, some of the things we have to do with employees, particularly in Colombia, sometimes they don't understand the pronouns, like why we have to put them after our name. So really understanding, even if it's not something very relevant where they live, understanding why it's relevant as an employee of an organization to add your pronouns there.
Yeah.
I think once they understand, it removes any other room for a myth or an idea, right? Like, this is why we put it there, because we accept, any there. So I think removing those stigmas or those things that we have to do it, but we don't know why. Every time we have to do something and we don't know why, there is that space in our brain that I'm going to make up my own story. It's just what we do. So giving people that reason, this is why we do it, because we really believe in inclusion. And I think it also promotes creating a better, and now I'm going to sound romantic, but a better world wherever they are.
Yeah. I was just, as you were talking to, when you spoke about Colombia, I work with a client right now that has offices across South America. And there's one particular leader, I want to say in Brazil. I want to say he's in Brazil, that we were looking at their scores, the psychological safety scores, and they were lower in some areas. And I said, I wonder how much of this is cultural. Because, they were having this wonderful experience to a point, but then when it came to pushing back or challenging, those scores dropped. And so I started to have a conversation with the leader around that. And she was like, he's very traditional in, what I say goes. This is, the bottom line. And so many of the folks in the office don't even feel like they can challenge, because challenging is part of the company culture, but not necessarily the culture of what he's created in that office in Brazil. So it's fascinating to me, because I'm like, if there's layers, there's layers to this.
And I love your example, because I've seen it in a little bit of a different context. And is when we have a core value challenge, right? That we think that's what we want. Like, intellectually, we think that's what we want. But we have proven to people around us that that's not what we want. And that tends to happen often I do have a client, and one of their core values is creativity. And at one of the meetings, he was saying, I can't even walk out of my office to get water because all the interns will come to give me all their ideas and their new projects. And I'm like, well, they're supposed to. You were looking for that. So really understanding that that interpretation of a core value might be different for all
Yeah.
for all of us, and it depends on all our elements, the way we think, the way our story, our individual values, maybe any past trauma or stories or experiences we've had. So really translating a value into what we are expecting has so much value and relevance, and they might not sound as attractive. But that practicality of behavior, and we're not necessarily telling people how to act, we're just giving them outlooks and ways to live up to that culture.
Yeah. It's so funny because I was thinking of when I worked at my last corporate job. One of the one of the tenets was a bias for action. And fundamentally, I got it, I understood it, and I appreciated it. But then doing DEI work, I was like, it's probably the worst tenet that's out there, because people operate out of passion, not necessarily understanding the full picture of what inclusion looks like or what diversity looks like or others' experiences. And they may be causing more harm than good because they're biased for action. They just want to get it done by any means necessary. Right. And so it was a two-edged sword, because, yes, we want to do this because this, and part of our culture is this bias for action. But at the same time, you have to be cognizant of the impacts and the, the ripple effect of that. And so, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, as you were saying that, and I'm thinking about how we are interpreting these cultures, or how we're interpreting these values, or how we're interpreting, what these organizations are saying, and how it lands on people so differently because of who they are and their experiences, and, the cultures that they grew up in. All of it is impacted. And so, I often say, even though we're all in the same place, doesn't mean we got there the same way.
Right.
It's the same thing, right? Just because we're all in the same place does not mean that we're all interpreting this phrase in the same way. And so we need to spend time in unpacking, what does that mean for this team or this leader, or, whatever it is. So, if there's this open door policy and you give me your ideas, give me your ideas, on Fridays between this time and this time, right? Like, you have to put parameters around it. So, it really is about how are you embodying that culture as a part of the process. And cultures tend to not shift that much, but they do shift.
I love that you said that it's a shift. And I think culture, I tell my clients, we are never done, right? Because culture fundamentally is the collective experience of a group.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about it individually, we are always changing, right? Like, I'm not the same person I was 3 years ago. So if you start with that concept, is that change management strategy that is never done. That's why you have to keep managing your culture, because even if you have the same people, which these days probably no one has like happening, but even if you have the same people, hypothetically, it will be a different culture because we're all having different experiences. And if on top of that, we put a layer of diversity, equity, and inclusion work, this other aspect of we're asking people to evolve and to think differently while being themselves, while showing up to work. So there are a lot of layers. That's why I think from a process improvement perspective, simplifying culture, it just gives so much vitality to an initiative because people can find themselves being part of something greater.
I love it. So if you are working with an organization and they are saying, you know what, we really want to focus on our culture. We're noticing that things are, what we're saying is not necessarily what people are experiencing. How would you, what would you have them start on as they're starting to prioritize that focus on culture?
So I like to do a data collection when I first start, just to see what patterns I can identify and if those patterns are part of a group or if those patterns are general for the whole organization. And
Mm,
depending on what I find out, usually a place that needs attention is leadership. And not, I'm not talking, C-level only. I'm talking leadership as showing up as a leader every day, regardless of where you land in the organizational,
mhm,
chart. And I think that gives people another way to develop as part of a bigger picture. And I
mhm.
think it's a great way as well to work on culture without having a culture summit or a culture day, because those events, while I don't have anything against them,
Just
yes,
check the box.
yes, they check the box and everyone has a great time, and then they come back on Monday and keep doing everything the way they were doing it before.
Yes.
So do we want to celebrate culture? Absolutely. But having a culture day or a culture summit doesn't mean you're going to have a culture change or a culture transformation or an evolution or whatever you want to call it. So
Mhm,
really working on something that is measurable, and that
mhm.
we can, like, I like to take measurements when I start, so that 6 months later I can say, okay, we have more job alignment here, we have more management alignment here, we
Yep.
have less engagement, whatever it is. So we can design different levers, and we're not just throwing things at people, but we are
Yeah.
targeting those initiatives.
I love that. I love that. You said it earlier, and I want to kind of bring it up again here, is like cultures are the behavior. So if we're doing these initiatives to start to shift cultures or to realign the culture, then the question and what's really being measured is what are the behaviors that we want to see changed?
Right,
And what does that look like? Right.
right.
I just did I was just asked to do an article for an organization, and that's exactly what we were talking about. It's, what are the behavior changes that you want to see? How are you going to measure that? And because this is the part where most organizations fail, how do you hold people accountable when they don't live up to those expectations? Right? Because the culture is, oh, this is what we've said that we, expect, but if we don't hold anybody accountable, then the culture is we're an organization that is not accountable, right?
Right.
Accountability is not a part of what we do. That's your culture. It's not this aspirational goal over here. And so when you're doing these things, and I love that you said that, it's the behaviors. What are those behaviors that need to be modified? What's acceptable and not acceptable? And then how do we hold people accountable to that?
I love that you brought the accountability piece, because I think that is connected to trust, and trust in the modern workplace is not just I trust you or I don't trust you, right? Is I think it's like half of it is can you do the job, but the other half is your character acceptable?
Yeah.
Can I live with this?
Yeah.
So bringing those pieces together, if you have employees that are able to develop their competencies, at the same time continue growing their character,
Hmm.
immediately you have accountability, which means you can trust each other. When we have all these core values and things that we say we're going to do, but nobody is actually doing it, there is no trust. Like it all
Right.
becomes lip service or poster service, but there is no that feeling of we are an inclusive company. It
Yeah.
just doesn't exist.
I love that. So we're gonna do a little bit of a pivot
Okay.
because this work isn't easy. It's hard. And telling people about their cultures. I hate to be the one to be like, your culture sucks, but Sometimes we have to do that. With data, of course. We do it with data
Of course, yes.
and professionalism.
Let the data talk.
The data says.
I'm just a voice.
So how do you take care of yourself? Like, what do you do to fill your cup and take care of you?
Oh, I love that question. Well, I love yoga.
Mm,
So I unfortunately I don't take a lot of classes at a studio like the way I used to. I have 3 boys, but I have a yoga mat in my office. And when I need it, I just go on my mat and center myself, and that helps me. I love to read, and that also gives me, it recharges me. I'm an introvert, so when I read, it's almost like I'm full of energy. Spending time with my family as well, but always making sure I'm keeping myself in check, because like that drain when the results are like the intention is there, but the results were not there yet.
mhm.
That is difficult, and to be completely honest, that is what drove me to your community, because it's a lot of support there so I'm not alone. I'm not like a weird person, right? Like I have another um, group of people that understand that what we do is difficult, and that the results are not immediate, but if we keep doing it collectively, we are making change is going to be sustainable. That's why I think creating community in our area of business is
Yeah.
also part of filling our own cup, like having this conversation when I'm not explaining to you why this is important, but we're just communicating that we come from different angles, but we agree on the power of behavior to create a different culture. That fills my cup right there.
I love it. I love it. I love it. So, Adriana, if folks wanted to get in contact with you, if they wanted to, learn more about the work that you do, how could they do that?
So I have a website, cultureredesign.com. I do some work. I'm active on LinkedIn, Adriana Vaccaro. And I also recently wrote an ebook on kind of like the timeless concepts of the workplace and how to make them relevant now as we do DEI and culture work.
Mm,
So I would love for your audience to have, I expect nothing in return, just want more people to read it.
love it. I love it. So, thank you so much for being with us today. Culture is one of those conversations that I'm always having, and to be able to do it on the show, I don't think we've ever done a show, specifically focused on culture. And so I appreciate, your viewpoints on this, because it is so, so important, especially as organizations are doing diversity and inclusion work or stepping away from diversity and inclusion work. The culture is not going anywhere.
Right.
And so this is the work that really needs to be foundational. So, Adriana, thank you so much for being a part of the show today.
Thank you.
And thank you all for tuning in to this week's episode of DEI After 5. As always, you can find us here every Tuesday at 5:15 p.m. Eastern, YouTube, wherever you find your podcast. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share with your colleagues. And until next time, have a good one.